Welcome to the Explainer. If you're in the learning and development space, you are likely all too familiar with a massive recurring frustration. You know the one, pouring time, energy, and resources into training programs that ultimately fail to produce actual on-the-job results. We churn out content, employees check the compliance boxes, and yet literally nothing changes in the workflow. Well, today we're breaking down a radically different approach derived directly from the methodologies of performance improvement experts like Guy W. Wallace. We're talking about totally abandoning generic education in favor of authentic, performance-based training. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with education versus authentic training, then shift to the performance competence mindset, learn to speak the business language, explore the power of analysis using the EPI fishbone model, and finally, reach what we call the pivot point. So, starting us off, Section 1, Education versus Authentic Training. In corporations right now, we too often see this heavy reliance on generic McDonald's training, basically just churning out certificates without any real context. To vividly illustrate why this is such a huge problem, let's look at a hilarious but incredibly potent analogy from performance guru Robert Major. Back in the mid-'80s, he dropped this line to completely silence a debate over semantics. Think about it. When he said this, the room erupted in laughter because the distinction is instantly obvious, right? One provides generalized awareness in theory. The other? Well, that involves specific application and practice. You see, education provides knowledge in a vacuum. It's just general awareness. But true training, that requires authentic practice applied directly to the workflow, and it has to be paired with both corrective and reinforcing feedback. We way too often build these educational modules, slap a training label right on them, and then sit around wondering why employees can't execute the specific behaviors required on the job. Moving right along to Section 2, the performance competence mindset. Fixing this broken model requires a fundamental paradigm shift. So the crucial point is that performance competence isn't just about possessing knowledge or even displaying certain behaviors. It's the verified ability to perform tasks that actually produce outputs to stakeholder requirements. If we aren't designing for that specific end result, we just aren't driving performance. But listen, we have to be incredibly careful here when we define those outcomes, because identifying all the stakeholders is paramount. You might produce a fantastic output that absolutely thrills your downstream customer, but if you violated safety laws, environmental codes, or child labor regulations to produce it, well, that is still a negative outcome. The customer is not the only king here. Regulatory agencies and safety auditors hold just as much, if not more, power over what makes a task successful. Now for Section 3, speaking the business language. A huge reason L&D teams fail to secure executive funding is our failure to speak the language of ROI. We come in talking about learning objectives while executives are talking about the bottom line. Let's anchor the financial stakes here with an amazing story from Guy Wallace. He was working with a defense contractor that needed to shift their engineers from drafting tables over to computer systems. When they asked him for a budget, he quoted $2 million, and the executives absolutely balked. No way. So he went to the whiteboard. He calculated the fully loaded salaries of the 100 people involved and got the executives to agree that these employees were currently operating at best 25% proficiency, which meant the company was literally leaving $6 million on the table every single year. And this brilliantly illustrates the core strategy. Instead of just asking for a budget, you have to compare the cost of conformance, that $2 million investment to build effective training, against the cost of non-conformance, the $6 million annual bleed of doing nothing. Suddenly, spending $2 million to solve a $6 million ongoing problem? It isn't a massive expense anymore. It's an absolute no-brainer. Which brings us to Section 4, the power of analysis. Look, we often avoid analysis because clients hate analysis paralysis. But analysis isn't a delay tactic. When a stakeholder comes in demanding a generic training course, you can stop bad requests right in their tracks by saucily dropping this powerful Socratic framing question. What would authentic practice with feedback look like? This forces the stakeholder to actually visualize the specific on-the-job application. And when they realize that generic content won't translate to real-world performance without tailored practice, they suddenly get why you need to analyze the workflow first. Once you get buy-in for that analysis, you can design practice that scales up. You have to prepare learners for high-stakes, authentic scenarios through 4 levels of exercises. You start with easy peasy just to demystify the process and remove the fear. Then you make it difficult by throwing in a monkey wrench. Next is darn difficult for those complex, layered tasks. And finally, the scenario from Hades, where absolutely everything that could go wrong literally does. This is how you build true competence, especially in high-risk environments.
All right, Section 5, the EPI fishbone model.
When your analysis reveals a performance gap, you've got to diagnose the actual root cause using visual frameworks. Notice the specific order of operations here. We always look at the process and the environment first. Why? Because if the standard operating procedure is flawed, or if the tools are broken, or if the culture actively rewards cutting corners, no amount of training will fix the output. You have to fix the environment before you try to fix the worker. Only after thoroughly examining the environment do we look at human enablers. And notice that missing knowledge or skill is actually just one tiny slice of the human equation. Are they physically capable of the task? Do they have these psychological attributes to handle intense ambiguity? Because if a person is fundamentally a square peg in a round hole, training just won't solve the problem. That's a hiring or placement issue. To really drive this home, look at this quote from W. Edwards Deming. Deming used to do this famous red bead experiment, where he'd have workers dip a paddle into a bowl mixed with white and red beads. Inevitably, they'd pull up red beads, and he would loudly yell at them for being incompetent. It was a brilliant demonstration proving that blaming individuals for systemic, environmental, or consequence-driven failures is just a massive waste of resources. Finally, Section 6, reaching the pivot point. This is the climax of the entire methodology, the moment when all your hard-won analysis data is finally brought back to the stakeholders. Let's move to and see how this builds across the project flow. You don't push back when a client asks for training. You take the order during intake. Then you conduct your analysis. But before you blindly move into design and develop, you stop at a critical junction, step 3. This junction right here is the pivot point. It is the absolutely crucial moment you review the data and decide if learning is actually the solution or if you must pivot to fix a process or environment problem. This is where L&D proves its ultimate business value. Saving the company from investing $100,000 into a training module that won't even work because the real issue is a broken software tool, that is a massive win. As you can see, different root causes literally demand completely different solutions. Wallace shares his incredible story about General Dynamics building the F-16 stealth aircraft. Parts were failing constantly on the line. Everyone blamed the workers and demanded training, but analysis showed the workers were perfectly following the work orders. The root cause was actually a massive backlog in the engineering change order system. The work orders themselves were out of date. The solution wasn't training. It was properly funding the engineering department. The core takeaway from all of this is that modern L&D must transcend just fulfilling orders for online courses. You need to transition into a true performance improvement consultant. You must be a business champion first, looking at the whole system, the ROI, the processes, and the environment, and a learning champion second. So, I want to leave you with this provocative thought as you look at your own intake requests and current programs tomorrow morning. Are you just safely delivering generic education in a vacuum? Or are you actually daring to engineer real, measurable performance competence? Think about it. Thanks for joining this explainer, and we'll see you next time.